All right, our next story. You may not be aware, and I suppose it's a bit like the same-sex ID legislation. Whilst polling would show that people are overwhelmingly against it, and 75%, I think, of the parliamentary submissions on it, in fact, were against it, because politicians decide they like it or there's a particularly vocal group of lobbyists that go through. At present, Parliament is considering changes to the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act. And the Sale of Supply and Alcohol Act would put, or the proposed changes would put further restrictions on outfits like supermarkets. And I'm presuming licensing trusts, there are changes underway there already, to make it harder to buy alcohol and restrict the advertising of alcohol. This comes, of course, at a time when all the major trends in our alcohol consumption are going the right way. It would seem whatever settings we have right now are producing positive results in terms of teenagers delaying the onset of their drinking lives and binge drinking less. In fact, massive generational change going on in drinking in New Zealand. And of course, overall, per head of population, our per person alcohol intake is dropping and has been for some time. So why are the new restrictions, and why are we so ambivalent about losing the ability perhaps to buy alcohol as freely as we used to? Well, to talk more about this issue, we're joined by Virginia Nicholls. She's the CEO of the Alcoholic Beverages Council, the ABC, which is kind of a lobby spokesperson group for the alcohol industry. Virginia, thanks for joining us. Welcome back to the platform.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, Sean.
All right, so what stage are we at with this legislation?
So where we're at is the Select Committee is now reporting back. I guess they're reporting back with their report, and they don't acknowledge any of the feedback or anything they've heard from community groups, including small business owners, beer, wine and spirit suppliers, and those who drink beer, wine and spirit safely and responsibly. And in particular, they've ignored the concerns from small business owners. I mean, most of the people involved in this industry are small business owners and long-standing responsible licensees who may lose their business as a result of these changes.
Okay, how many will lose their businesses by your estimation?
Well, it's very difficult to know that. So to understand it, this is all about local alcohol policy. So to give you a little bit of background on that, like licensing processes are decided by a district licensing committee, and they're done in 67 different territory authorities or councils around New Zealand. And they have to keep in with the relevant local alcohol policy. Now, as an example, if that policy has what they call a proximity provision, it means that sites such as, say, if a school or a church, moves in down the road or is there, and they put that into their local alcohol policy, this will force the closure of a pre-existing or an off-licence, irrespective of whether or not it's well run and valued by the community. It's a big issue. I can give you an example of that too, Sean. For instance, under the proposed new regime, if a neighbourhood restaurant, which was operated responsibly for years, may find themselves under this new proposed regime, having their licence refused because a new medical centre's opened along the road.
Or someone opens a preschool.
Oh, absolutely. That's correct.
All right, that does seem, I'm just going to say, from a Kiwi point of view, that seems grossly unfair. In terms of the Select Committee process, how many people did turn up to protest it or make submissions opposing the proposed legislation?
I actually, I don't know. I don't have those numbers. I know there was about 420 people did submit. And I certainly know one of the alcohol groups did a sort of a template thing to make it easy for people to submit. And I think about 80 or so actually went before the committee itself.
Okay,
to actually speak
but
to
you're
committee.
saying this was the subject of one of those wowser campaigns where you get a pro forma submission and they say that's X number. Okay, which means generally that you have a Select Committee which has already predetermined its view on an issue. And I think we could probably look at the self-ID as a process where that happened.
I think that's how it feels. It feels to us as if it didn't matter what any of these very responsible business owners and things said and what the public said, who just want to drink in a responsible way. They've just ignored it all. They'd pre-decided it, I think, before they even went into Select Committee. I mean, an example of that too, Sean, is that when the Minister announced that they were going to review this legislation, which we actually support, I mean, it makes an awful lot of sense to have licensing as a focus and strengthen community involvement. But that was at the end of October. 6 weeks later, the bill hadn't even been started then. It was went before Parliament. And so there was no consultation with anybody in the community about that bill. And so it sort of says, and then they went pretty quickly into select committee. Initially, they were only going to allow a very short period of time and counting the Christmas holidays before you actually had to submit. And we, like many people, asked for just a little bit more time. I think we got an extra week.
So what is it you want from the government? What do you want now?
So, well, what we want now really is, I think, the removal of the proximity provisions for organisations, if you like, are pre-existing. That should not be the case. It can be the case if you are new, but not for existing businesses. It's actually just not. It's not fair, and it's not, I don't think, what our community wants.
Yeah. Okay, so
that's the first thing.
Yeah.
I think the other thing too is, at the moment now in this legislation, you can't now appeal to the Alcohol Regulatory Licensing Authority, so the Alcohol Authority. So what it plans now is, what's happened in the past is when you didn't agree with a local alcohol policy, you could ask for an appeal to go to ALA. And now they're going to stop that, which is crazy stuff, because this is an economic way for people in the community to actually get an appeal right, have somebody else hear what the decision has been on a local alcohol policy, because you can tell how important local alcohol policies are, particularly if those proximity provisions are in there. Yeah. And that's a big deal as well. And I mean, I think, to be fair, councils, they don't always get things right. And losing that sort of appeal right to ALA removes really important check on councils themselves.
Yeah. Okay, here's a question, Virginia, a big picture question. Why don't we simply have national rules and policies about the sale and supply of alcohol? Why do we have all these regional bloody variations in a country of just, 5 million people? Why do we have all these little fiefdoms saying this or you do that or we're different?
When you actually go through this whole process, and that's something that we've been discussing as well, and if we'd had a greater opportunity to provide more information when the bill was being drafted, that would have been an area we would have liked to have had a good discussion on, because you have to wonder now whether or not that's a good idea, that we put more into the actual act itself so that everybody knows, if you like, what the rules are, how we've got to operate. And I think there's another area too that I think has been, for some reason, ignored really. It's just the calibre of the people, if you like, that actually run our restaurants or our bottle stores. The person that's got the manager's certificate, they're absolutely critical. And they can make such a difference really in our community. I mean, you get a really good operator in there. They understand what the community wants. They understand the issues. They obviously understand the Act. And they train their staff well. We need to be doing more, I think, in that area there as well. I understand they do a bit more of this in Australia, and it sounds to me like a very good
Might
idea.
be easier too, Virginia, to do that if you're operating to a single set of national standards.
I think that's absolutely right, and I think that would be a really good improvement, and we could all contribute to find a middle ground as to what's going to work, what's appropriate, and what's, to be fair, what's right for the responsible drinker as well, because remember, that's 81% of us.
Yeah, 81% of people do drink responsibly, and as I said in my intro, it's not like our alcohol problem is growing, and in fact, quite the opposite.
No.
On every statistic and survey I see says we're drinking less and we're drinking more responsibly, particularly our young people, which will feed through over the years.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah. What do you think the chances are that the government will turn around, this proximity rule for existing businesses, and when is this due to pass into law?
So it's back now. It's waiting to, they've only just come back into Parliament last week, and so we're waiting now to see what the process is going to be. They can speed this through the system if they do want to. And obviously we don't know what's going to happen there. It could come into law relatively quickly, or it could be delayed because there's only so many days between now and the end of August when Parliament finishes before the election. But I think there's another area as well, Sean, that I don't really understand at all. They're allowing now objectors to object from anywhere around New Zealand.
That's right, yeah.
License. And that's actually quite crazy.
So
really.
someone in Invercargill can have a go about a bottle shop in Trentham, right?
Absolutely.
Crazy.
And that actually doesn't make sense when you go back to what the Act is all about. The Act is all about local people having a say for local issues, and yet we're going to allow someone from Auckland, as an example, to come and have their or put their opinion, shall we say, of someone else in Southland, that they just don't understand what's happening in that community.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to slow up the whole process as we wait we're going to have a lot more hearings as a result of that as well. So I think it's going to slow things off and not speed them up, which is a pity because we need to keep, these sort of processes going. I mean, we've got nearly 11,000 licences, which has declined, by the way, over the past 12 years by 23%. So, but it's still a lot of licences, and we still need to keep it moving, if you like, and spending more time on those operators who are perhaps not operating up to a certain standard. And those are the ones we need to concentrate on. But what we find is most of the operators out there with a licence operate at a very high standard and a very high level and are doing a good job.
Virginia, I think those are all valid points. And as I say, I think we're drinking better, and I just don't know why we don't have one set of rules that are clear for everyone. I thank you very much indeed for your time this morning.
Great.
That is Virginia Nicholls, the CEO of the Alcoholic Beverages Council. And of course, as we found last week, we're drinking, people overseas are drinking a lot of our spirits, nipping our spirits. I've had tons of texts this morning, tons of texts. It's the Russians that have been drinking irresponsibly. We should be targeting them with artillery, says Brendan.